My name is Aimee Bobruk. I'm a singer and a songwriter, born and raised in East Texas. I live in Austin, where I teach music, play gigs, walk my dog, and yeah, I like to take a daily swim in the neighborhood pool. I have a nice American life. A life I think I would have just gone on living, same as always, had it not been for the 2016 presidential election. It was so charged. I mean, it really seemed to touch something in everybody. For the first time in my life, I felt politically engaged. I found that I cared about the issues discussed, especially the debates about the Mexican border and the wall. It kind of woke me up. I also realized that I knew almost nothing about the subject. Even though I live just a short drive away, it has always seemed like this faraway place that I had no emotional connection to. Surprisingly, the entire country seemed to have an opinion about the border, including myself, and yet I'd never been there. Now, I know from the history books that in 1846, Texas was annexed to the United States. Border disputes followed, resulting in the Mexican-American War. And by the end, the Rio Grande was officially the border. It's over 1,200 miles long from the Gulf of Mexico to El Paso. The population is 3 million people, and 9 out of 10 are of Hispanic descent. But these are just statistics and lines on a map. How does it look in real life? I wanted to find out, so I decided to make a documentary. I write songs for a living, so I'm used to putting my perspective into words. Simple task, right? Go down to the border, interview some people, and get it on camera. Only I had never made a film before, let alone conducted an interview or even ridden a motorcycle. Here I go. I wanted to start at Boca Chica Beach, where the Rio Grande meets the ocean, literally where America begins. It looks like I can take a right and drive about half a mile down, and I'll see the mouth of the river. Looking out at this magnificent view, I could see men fishing in Mexico, just a stone's throw away. A swimmer could jump in the water and be in Mexico in 2 minutes. So the Rio Grande comes right around there and swerves and then dumps out right here into the Gulf of Mexico. As a physical boundary of 2 countries, the Rio Grande is not just any river. It's a division of cultures. I'm really drawn to places where 2 points meet. I think one of the most beautiful images for me is where this road just dead ends into the sand. I took a few moments to take it in. I'm here to learn about the border and do my documentary, but I also hope to gather sounds and impressions to interpret artistically, the only way I know how, in songs. The crew is nearly complete. Lauren, the girl behind the camera, drove down in my dad's truck from Austin last night, and my buddy Brandon offered to come along for the ride and help with audio. This was my first long ride on a bike, and I learned 2 things very quickly. 1, you get tunnel vision after about an hour, and 2, your butt gets sore even faster. My first interview is in Brownsville, at Galleria 409, just a few blocks from the bridge to Mexico, with Samantha Isabel, a Mexican artist who has a workspace in Matamoros, just across the river. She works with chili peppers and talks about what inspires her work.
Right now I'm working with a pepper that we call it guajillo or chile color. The wall is in reference of the border walls that we have over here in Brownsville, and also it had a lot to do with the first speech of Mr. President Donald Trump. I felt that we must smell, Mexicans, we must smell of something that we bother people with our presence, that we are so overwhelming or we're so annoying to a point that every sense of a person who is close by of us feels something that you can't escape us. Without really thinking much of it, I thought of the chiles because they had all those properties. They smell, you see them, the light makes them even bigger.
Samantha's words have me wondering, is this really how Mexican Americans are viewed in our country? Do they bother us with their presence? And might it be the other way around in a different context? Could I, a middle-class white American woman, bother someone with my mere existence? Next up is Mark Clark, a local artist whose name seems to pop up no matter who I talk to about my project. He looks like he's traveled 7 times around the globe. You can see it written in the lines on his face. He has strong opinions about the wall outside his front door.
Brownsville seemed to be the right place for a mixed-race individual like myself. I found it comfortable aquí in Brownsville. No hay nada diferencia. There's no difference. People here are thoroughly intermarried with people over there in Matamoros. The border doesn't really exist. I mean, there's not a line out there in the center of the river. Donald Trump is trying to make this division that just exists on maps into a really concrete obstacle between our two cultures. I mean, this is America's numero uno trading partner, and we get wonderful people who have rebuilt the Pentagon, the World Trade Center, and constructed about half of America, or harvested all of our crops. We're building an obstacle between them and us.
To thumb his nose at Homeland Security, Mark built a bicycle.
I acquired some iron that's square tubing that's 1 inch thick, and we used that and an old Huffy Rocket BMX bicycle to make my border wall DHS special. Anything we can do to call attention to the idiocy that's going on down the street and up at the White House. I think we should not pass up the opportunity.
You have to be in the circus to ride this bike, by the way.
I am in this. I am the circus. 1, 2, 3. There you go. Don't head down the hill.
It's time to move on. We've got to get to McAllen tonight. A relatively easy ride, about 2 hours long. As a nice salute, a group of local bikers, Los Escondidos, rides along with me to the edge of town. As we ride out of Brownsville, Los Escondidos, all on Harleys, generously ignore my sissy European bike. We get to McAllen in the early hours of the evening. My body feels like I've had a turn in a cement mixer, but somehow I'm just too excited to fall asleep. We had a very slow start in McAllen. My sensitive Ducati bike sputtered in fits and starts down the road due to what turned out to be a tank of cheap gas. Lesson learned. Because of the bike issue, I arrived a little late to the day's first interview with John Brush at the Quinta Mazatlan World Birding Center. It was my first visit ever to a Texas birding center, and down here there are tons. We talked about birds that are unique to the region and their migratory patterns.
So birds migrate essentially for 2 reasons. You can determine how they migrate and what kind of pattern of migration they're going to have based off of 2 things: the variability of food abundance and the seasonality of that food abundance. A lot of birds, there's about 30 down here that we call South Texas specialty birds. So they're mostly seen in South Texas in the United States. The chachalaca is the only member of its family that shows up in the U.S. The reason they got their name, Chachalaca, is because of their vocalization.
I couldn't help but think how birds freely cross the border. Could it be the same with humans? We move to find better work, feed our family, to prosper.
So I would really like to learn some bird calls. Can you teach me a bird call?
Okay, I'll try to teach you a couple. We'll do an easy one. We'll do a fun one. The kiskadee. It's hard to get the quality right, but it's a...
McAllen is home to a lot of flea markets, like most other places in the valley. I always thought of them as fun places to see kitschy stuff or get a cheap pair of Ray-Bans. It seems that a lot of people, for lack of a better job, try to make a living, or at least a little extra for themselves. I stopped to talk with Rosie. She has a mouthful of teeth I just can't ignore.
No, I'm here. Have it 10 years?
Rosie's broken English was a bit tough for me to understand, but what I gathered was that folks from Mexico aren't coming because the value of the peso has decreased and because they are afraid of something. After all, these markets are for locals as well as Mexicans, if not more so.
Un abrazo? Yeah, sure. I mean, I dig it. I love the markets, man. And there's a lot of colors. There's a lot of objects. I mean, the way people pile things, like this truck over here, that always amazes me.
At the end of the day, we head out toward Rio Grande City, where we will stay the night. We drive parallel to the river, and suddenly I see this little road that I'm sure will lead to the water's edge. Why not take a little detour to have a glimpse of the border from here? Turns out, though, it's a dead end, where I'm greeted by Jesus and his father, who chat with me about life in El Refugio.
So this is the end?
This is the end.
So how far is the river from
The
here?
river's like walking distance right down there.
Have you ever seen, has there ever been, violence or illegal activity
Not
right here?
violence, but illegal activity, yeah. And shootouts mostly down that way.
As we speak, a helicopter flies over and ruins the sound on the video. Jesus hardly notices the noise. He's used to having the Border Patrol around all the time.
As you can see, that's the vigilance we have now. Or, yeah, I want to call it like that. Those are the people that protect us.
Oh.
Help us with anything bad that might happen to the people that live near the border. We mind our own business, to be honest.
At least the people around here do their best to mind their own business. Every house on this street is barricaded by a fence.
I had to do this fencing because when they would cross, sometimes they would go through our property, and that was a little unnerving because I take care of my parents, and they're already in age, so it got me kind of scared.
Jesus and his family understand what drives people to cross the river.
They would just cross, I guess, seeking the American dream or whatever,
Getting up in Rio Grande City. This is going to be a great day. When we get to Laredo, we're going for a canoe ride on the river, and I just can't wait. On the way, I pass through several colonias. In fact, there are over 840,000 people, mostly legal and undocumented immigrants, living in what are called colonias along the border. These are settlements outside city limits that lack basic infrastructure, like running water and electricity. Who would have thought that third world conditions existed in America?
So I've noticed a lot of these little water windmills. I think they're for fresh drinking water. I believe from my understanding, there are lots of people that don't have access to clean drinking water. So I've seen people come with plastic bottles and fill up, and it's just something I've noticed from the road that I'm not used to seeing back home.
Just before Laredo, we passed through San Ygnacio. This little village is home to about 650 people. The houses by the riverside are fenced in with tall chain links and the place is overrun by dogs and horses. In Laredo, we see Mack trucks all over the place. It's a little unnerving on a bike, and I feel like an ant in comparison. As the largest inland port in the U.S., virtually all imported and exported goods going by truck to Mexico and further south pass through this city. We meet Carlos, our river guide, who's promised to take us on a sweet canoe ride down the Rio Grande. This is the real thing. Finally, I get to explore the water. I feel a little like Jacques Cousteau.
Go ahead and get in.
Okay. Oh, let's stay centered. Yeah, I can feel every little move that you make, Brandon. Okay, I just really need to be honest. Is it gonna be this hard for like 2 hours?
It is. That's why I was about to tell you that.
We're going into the shore.
Get out of that current. That might be the easiest thing to do.
I love the water. I'm a big swimmer, but I think I have to brush up on my canoeing skills. This might be one of the most embarrassing moments.
It's very difficult with the wind, and that was my concern.
I'm gonna just pretend like this is me. Check it out. See how fast I'm going?
I don't think there's a better metaphor. You're like in this boat of your life, and sometimes you get whipped around and taken by the wind, and you end up on a different shore. The river just took us at its own will, and we ran straight into Mexico, and then kind of freaked out a little bit, and Carlos pulled us upstream, and we had our boats drug along the Rio Grande, and I just feel a lot better now. Oh my God, we made it back. After an exhausting afternoon sparring with the elements, any adventurer needs a solid meal. Thank God we find the restaurant Las Quecas, a little piece of heaven in Laredo. As Brandon and I sit down at the table, we are joined by my friend and local artist, Gil, and the owner, Nicholas Belizia. I'm eating your pico de gallo here. And I have to say, I'm 36 years old, and it is the best pico de gallo I've ever had in my entire Texan life. Silence falls at the table, and after numerous praises over his award-worthy pico de gallo, I try and get Nicholas to reveal the recipe.
It goes from like 7 different items. But don't ask me which ones.
I can tell what the secret ingredient is.
What is it?
It's love.
Thank you. It's passion, definitely, yes.
No luck. I can't get him to reveal his secret recipe. So I ask about his experience of living on the border.
What I like about Laredo, it's quite simple. It's like living in Mexico with the benefits of the U.S. As simple as that. We have the same language, almost the same culture. Even though Laredo is very hard, if you walk around Mexico and you smile to anyone, even though you don't know them, they're gonna smile back to you.
Are there any other drastic differences across the bridge?
I would say there's a lot.
What, like what?
Like perhaps anywhere you leave, you know everyone in 3 to 4 blocks around. Right here, you don't even know your neighbors. And in Mexico, it's quite normal. But really, the biggest difference is that even though they don't have too much economic power, their lives is quite different. They're happier, I'm gonna say.
You think that they're happier?
Yes.
If they are happier in Mexico, then why do so many risk so much to come to the States illegally? I mean, if proper wages and civil rights don't make you happy, then what does? Or is it the other way around? Can we learn to be happier from our Mexican neighbors? Is it their close-knit communities that brings out the joy?
And that's basically our culture. We always try to help people.
So how does food tie into that?
Basically, the flavors. The flavors brought you back to your culture. And when you haven't tasted, you don't know what you're missing. When you grew up with these flavors, you miss them.
In Mexico, it's the music, the people passing by. There's a dog that's asking for food, and the smell, and all these things sort of add not only. I think to add to the flavor of the plate.
Exactly.
It's also
add
like
value
visually
to the plate.
and it's just all the senses. It's a plate of everything.
The highlight of tonight is sitting around a table with friends and just sharing a great meal and talking about culture on this side of the river and on the other side of the river.
Today we're riding the Eagle Pass along an old dirt road with hardly another living soul in sight. But first I get a chance to talk with George Altgeld, a member of the city council in Laredo. I'm excited to talk with a local politician whose city is at the center of so many of the important issues of the day. Plus, he rides a bike. We take Mines Road headed west out of Laredo. On the way, George pulls over to show us the Laredo-Columbia Solidarity International Bridge. This is his backyard, and he is proud to give us some stats.
Laredo is the second biggest port in the Western Hemisphere, only behind Long Beach, California. The amount of commercial traffic that comes in and out of Laredo, over 14,000 commercial vehicles every day going in and back out of Mexico.
I've never seen so many trucks. So what he is saying makes sense. Lots of trade and commercial traffic. But what about the foot traffic?
The border has this crossroads of, immigration. There's this crossroads of international trade. There's this crossroads of, now we've got the wall that's being interjected into the discussion. If we had meaningful immigration reform, we wouldn't need all the boots on the ground. There would be a legal way for folks to come in and go out, not a social security number, not a pathway to citizenship, but a means to come out of the shadows, meaningfully provide for their families, and go back home to their families. Who wants to live far, far, far away from the people that they love the most, right? Because most of them end up never going back across, because once they go back, well, then they got to run all the whole risk of getting back through again. So the only thing they do is get to the Western Union and send money back home. That's the whole reason that they're here to begin with.
George sees life at the border as a commingling of cultures, a two-way street. Like a lot of people I've talked with, he is hoping for a resolution to the immigration conflict that serves both countries. I'm pretty sure I know what his answer is going to be, but I have to ask him what he thinks about the proposed wall.
Think about, all the ranches we rode by on the way out here. Think about all of, the livestock, watering of crops, the access by the, wildlife, all of this ecosystem and this economy, at its foundation is water. And so the government's attempt to, suggest that this wall is going to increase our national security, but gut our economy seems to me to be a fool's errand.
So here we are. This is where the pavement ends and the dirt road begins. We hear the road gets a little hairy, so we're gonna have fun with our GoPros and hit it.
Enough talk. I want to ride and see firsthand what this remote border back road is all about. We've about 100 miles ahead of us, and we expect it will take around 5 to 6 hours to get to Eagle Pass. Surprisingly, we arrive in 3 hours, and I'm not even sore. We meet on the banks of the Rio Grande. I'm learning more and more that ranchers along the border actually help people that are crossing the river. Some might call it humanity. Others might call it hypocrisy. But some ranchers place ladders over their fences, not necessarily to help the immigrants cross, but to prevent them from cutting the fence wires.
As a going-away gift, we got you a little something special.
What?
Yeah.
You don't have anything for me.
Yes, I do.
We were riding all day.
It's right here. We've got a polka lesson for you from our dance maestro extraordinaire.
In honor of all the Czech, Polish, German people that came to Texas and gave us Tejano music. There we go.
Very good job.
Bravo.
Thank you. Thank you for what you're doing.
Today we're headed to Sanderson via Del Rio. The fields outside Quemado are wide and open, so it's hard not to see the irrigation canal that runs alongside the road. The water in these canals is pulled from the Rio Grande and helps irrigate the farms around here. A lot of them grow pecans, and many have street stands. We stop at one and meet Alex, who seems to have wandered out of a Coen Brothers movie.
Well, I stopped here with my motorcycle to see your pecan stand, but it looks like it's closed today.
This road.
Why?
No pecans.
There are no pecans?
No pecans.
Because you ate them all.
We ate them all.
Is it, when do pecans grow? Did I miss the season?
In October it starts pecans.
October, pecans start in October and are harvested?
November.
Where are you from?
Mexico.
From Mexico?
Mm-hmm.
And how long have you lived here?
Since 63.
Did you come with your family?
I came with my mama.
No secrets about Quemado?
A bunch of wetbacks.
A bunch of wetbacks?
Well, I've seen wetbacks come to
A bunch. Do they still come here?
Still come to sometimes.
He says we might have better luck finding pecans up the street at Moses Farms. Before we go, he shows us around his yard.
Chicken?
Lilia lives at Moses Farms, just a few blocks away. She grew up on the farm and has recently taken over the 11,000 pecan trees. She's camera shy, but glad to enlighten us on this local nut. What is Quemado about? How would you describe your town to people?
Back in the 60s, I would say it was very much like a Mayberry.
Do people cross the river illegally here?
You know, I guess if you're not involved with that, you just, I don't want to say look the other way, but you're careful. Let's put it that way, you're careful.
Are there any secrets you can tell me about pecans? Any names?
There's about 200 varieties. They've got Indian names, like the one that everybody looks for is Cheyenne, Wichita, Sioux, Mohawk. I make pecan brittle and pralines and praline pecans. I don't have any right now. If I did, I'd give you some.
Approaching Del Rio and it's only lunchtime. Still no pecans. At least not for me.
It's sweet. Tastes good.
We meet with Cinco Calderon at his family's restaurant, a place that serves up good food and live music. Cinco's dad used to play with Ray Price, and once we start jamming, it's pretty clear that this pecan didn't fall far from the tree.
What is living on the border like in Del Rio? Do you just go back and forth whenever you want?
What people mistake about the security on the border these days, even though it is Mexico and, you know, we're right on it, what people mistake is that the reason that we have such high security to begin with is because of 9/11. So that's what originally started this whole border action, you know, don't let anybody in, don't let anybody in. And then, of course, later on down the line, you know, a few years later, the cartels, the drug cartels came in and pretty much were enforcing, you know, scared a lot of the people away. A lot of the businesses shut down. It was a sad thing for Mexico because they tried to stay up, but see what the influence was they would tax the business owners just to collect money. And the ones that didn't really want to pay, it was like the movies. The ones that didn't want to pay, they would burn your place down.
Since you've traveled to other parts of the state, I mean, how's your perspective different from other people who've not traveled?
Del Rio is just kind of so isolated in the middle of West Texas. It's the midpoint between Brownsville and El Paso, pretty much. So it feels like it's the armpit of Texas is what they call it. The armpit right there.
You come to it as a musician.
Huh?
I mean, you are a musician.
Correct.
So there's
my views are way off.
But I don't know if I'd say that, because I think that when you travel and you, sometimes when you travel away from home, you're able to see your roots more.
Well, that's what, and that's the reason I stayed, because I grew up on the Spanish stuff. I grew up laying down listening to my father play the piano before I went to school, under the piano. So, I mean, this is where my house was, and this is where my house is.
Cool.
Yep.
Well, thanks for your time, man.
Awesome. Thank you for jamming.
Thanks for the little jam, too.
That was awesome.
As we move on, we stop at the Pecos Bridge, one of the finest monumental vistas in the state. This is Judge Roy Bean territory, the gateway to West Texas. We turn into Pumpville, a dusty and deserted old water station for locomotives. It's been a long drive, and I'm feeling a little beat up by the dry West Texas wind. The crew and I rest while we leave the camera rolling to catch the sunset on this ghost town.
We stayed last night here at the Budget Inn in Sanderson, Texas. And this morning we're leaving Sanderson and we're driving into Big Bend Park down to Boquillas. We're gonna cross into Mexico and see what that border crossing is like in Boquillas, Mexico. And then we're gonna head on to Terlingua. But I wanna say thank you first to our best hotel host who made us chai, and his mother made us Indian food this morning.
We head out of Sanderson towards Big Bend National Park. I'm struck by the openness of the landscape. Can it get more beautiful than this? There's a port of entry into Mexico at Boquillas, and we have just enough time for a lunch, a donkey ride, and an interview.
Where are you from?
Oh, Texas, Austin.
Austin.
Man, this is a long journey.
Yeah.
We have like, how long is this gonna take?
10 minutes.
10 minutes?
3 minutes.
3 minutes, okay.
3 seconds or 3 seconds.
In less than a minute, we're in Mexico. We wobble our way into town on burros. It's evident from the abundance of crafts sold that Boquillas completely depends on tourists. We sit down for lunch, and a local guide tells us how he used to cross over the mountains to work in Dallas.
Me crossing over there 50 miles down.
That's how you
crossing
get to Dallas.
To the mountains. You crossing going to Fort Stockton. And Fort Stockton is there for McAllen. We go to McAllen and Fort Stockton, and we call telephone somebody picking up and go to Dallas.
So you go through the mountains to get to the United States. Wow. And then you work and you come back.
Yeah.
And will you still do that again? Will you do that this year, next year?
Me no come back no more for me jumping here.
Okay.
It's not better, right?
What do you think about the notion of President Trump wanting to build a wall?
I'm right here. All the people not like it today.
They don't want a wall?
No, want it. No, I don't want it. I don't need it. No need another side. It's for problem for the animals. Another side, no coming for drinking water. But if muro, with the muro, the animals in the park no come across, no water in the park.
So if the wall is there, then the animals won't be able to get to the water.
Here, in the middle of the Chihuahuan Desert, it seems apparent that a wall is going to impact wildlife. The last boat back to the U.S. leaves at exactly 5 p.m. So with one eye on the clock, I take the last few minutes to wander up the road and take some photos. We're back and ride west out of Big Bend to end the day in the outlying town of Terlingua.
I woke up in Terlingua, Texas this morning. It's a beautiful sunrise over the desert, and my friend Marty Whitmore is waiting for me at the airstrip. We're going to be taking an airplane ride, a scenic route around Big Bend, the river, and some canyons. I've never been up in an airplane in this region before, and I'm very much looking forward to seeing what the landscape looks like. Cheers! Is this the plane that we're using?
This is the airplane we're going to use. It's a 1946 Piper Cub, J3 Cub. And we're gonna take off and go down this runway towards the Rio Grande River. and then that'll be over the national park or close to it. And then we are going to go up towards the state park, the Big Bend Ranch State Park. We'll fly over the Solitario. We're going to fly over Devil's Canyon.
I've known to get a little motion sickness, and I'm going to be okay. There's going to be a lot of
I'm hoping
vibration.
you'll be fine, but we're prepared for that. We've got a little Ziploc for you.
Oh, God. Okay, I hope not. Okay, let's get going.
Okay,
I'm excited.
let's do it.
Woo! Airplane over the desert.
It is so tiny. Cozy.
Here's my zippy bag if I need it. It's going to be tucked right here. I've been to Terlingua many times, and the raw beauty of this place never ceases to give me a sense of awe. It's truly overwhelming. The views are stunning. In fact, it's so beautiful, it's sickening. So instead of giving you an uninterrupted view of God's wondrous nature, here's a little clip of me in a barf bag. Once, twice, and yes, even a third time as a finale to round off the ride.
We made it to the Devil's Playground and got sick.
I need help out to the bathroom. I'm sorry.
Help her out, honey.
Sorry. Aimee, you doing okay?
She used the Ziploc. Ruined a brand new Ziploc.
When my stomach had stopped doing cartwheels, I was ready to hear Marty talk about border life in the desert.
Well, we've been coming down here to this area and fell in love with it over 35 years ago. And yes, it is very emotional. The border, of course, has changed. It used to be a much more fluid border. Even the children from the Mexican sister cities would come to school over here, and people bought their groceries here. And the camaraderie and the care that people take of each other is very intense.
How have you seen that vibe change from 35 years ago?
I think actually in some places it's actually healing. We have a celebration in May that's called Voices Across the Borders, and on that day we join as two villages together. It's Lajitas and Paso Lajitas. There is so much history in this area, and like I said, everyone cares for everyone else.
We left Terlingua after a bumpy plane ride, but a fun one. We're headed west on a scenic route, a road that follows the Rio Grande to Ruidosa via Presidio. I pulled over because it's really windy right now and I need a little break from my bike, but behind me is the Rio Grande, and I think I'm just gonna let this road speak for itself.
It's the second to last day of the trip. I want to touch the river one last time. So we drive to Candelaria, the last town along the Rio Grande that I can see on the map. All the roads disappear until El Paso. There's a noise from an engine behind us, and for a moment I think it's the Border Patrol. Turns out to be the Marlboro Man on a four-wheeler. His name is Sergio. He's a caretaker of a ranch nearby, and he stops to talk to us and to the folks on the other side. In some places, the Rio Grande feels like a great divide, but here you don't sense so much division. Sergio is talking to his friends across the river as casually as if they were sitting across from one another at a dinner table. 50 feet down the river, hidden in the bushes, there's a cable bridge crossing. El Paso is vibrating. In contrast to Candelaria, this place is as busy as a beehive. This is the place where Texas meets New Mexico, and ultimately, this is how far we go. My last interview is with Susana Villa. She has invited her mother, Ermina, her aunt, Isabel, and her daughter, Brianna, to join us for a conversation about culture and assimilation. These 3 generations represent 60 years of relations with the U.S., the past, the present, and future. What have they adopted from American culture?
Oh man, I think independence. As I would see my moms and my aunts, they didn't really get to go to school or have secondary education, college education. I mean, I'm assuming they had an opportunity or not, but they married and they had to take care of the kids and the family. I want to do something. I want to, eventually go to college. I know I didn't want to, but I did. I wanted to make something of myself and be independent and live on my own. 1 year before I graduated, my mom asked me, well, okay, you have 1 year. What are you going to do? Once I get my paycheck, I'm going to get my own apartment. I'm going to live on my own and all this stuff. And she told me no. She told me, you are not leaving our house until you have a ring on your finger. And I was, what? What do you mean you're not letting? No, you're my only daughter. And that's not what we do in our culture. You do not leave this house unless you have a ring on your finger. And I was like, crushed. She knows the story because she's like, why did you marry Dad? I was like, I had to get out of the house. She left Mexico because she wanted to leave for a better life or something. And that's kind of what I wanted to do, right? Not so much that it was a better life, but I wanted to get out. And she told me no.
I can sense the resistance Susana encountered from her mother in carving out her own life. But what about Brianna, the next generation?
Me siento triste porque yo quiero
She
que
feels
estén
sad
los-
That I don't live with my mom still. She kind of talks about it like, why did you leave home? You should have stayed with mom and be there. And I'm just like, no, I wanted my independence. So it's kind of like hard because I do want to follow the culture and be married and give my grandma a family. But I also think like, no, like, why should I have to? I should be happy for myself, like no one else.
All 3 of these women had to negotiate between the expectations of their inherited culture and their independence. What they hang on to shapes their Mexican-American identity. If you count Ciudad Juarez, the sister city across the river, the area is home to nearly 3 million people. There's a wall here, physically and mentally. Children from Juarez rush to greet us. One kid is eager to show off how easily he can climb the fence, while another shares his opinion on the muro, or the wall.
Angel, like an angel. Victor.
Todo, lo brinco todo y me regreso de volada.
Oh, yeah. Yo quiero entender sobre qué piensas sobre este.
¿Qué pensamos sobre el muro? No nos gusta porque no nos dejan pasar porque nosotros vamos a trabajar en The Wall. Go in The Wall a trabajar allá, nosotros, pero el pinche Donald Trump no entiende el del pelillo que se le cae el pelo a ese. Donald Trump, peluquín, a ese señor no entiende que queremos nomás nosotros ir a trabajar, ¿sabe cómo? O sea, queremos trabajar, ¿verdad? Y él piensa que nosotros vamos a robar o vamos a hacer cosas malas, pero no.
¿Tú quieres trabajar
Sí,
aquí?
yo estaba trabajando allá en Anthony, Texas. Trabajábamos aquí en Sunland Park trabajaba yo y él también. Aquí trabajábamos, pero pues la neta nos reportaron de allá. Y volver porque pues al rato ellos miran. Y al rato ellos también van a querer trabajar porque pues todos se van para allá a trabajar. Y allá hay más billetes, money. Hay money, acá no hay ni madres. Acá no hay nada, acá hay pum, robar, matar, asaltar, ¿sabe cómo? Y acá, allá hacemos posibilidades de trabajar. Y aquí ya no, aquí ya no nomás ahí haciendo puras pendejadas. ¿Sí me entiende cómo?
No, un poquito así, un poquito.
¿Sí se entiende, güey? ¿Sí se entiende?
Here's where my ride ends, and now is a time when I look back on what I've learned. In one broad stroke, there's no final truth about the border, or any other area for that matter. The border is fluid. In reality, a people and a culture are not as static as a line on a map. For those living here, the US and Mexico are not two different countries. What I found down here was a Mexican culture and approach to life mixed with the finest American ideal, the right to seek your own happiness. Along the ride, I've made a lot of friends, people that treated me like one of their own. I learned from Suzanne and her family that it takes many years to assimilate into a new culture. You can't hurry the process, but we can begin by respecting what and where the new Americans come from and be positive and open towards their search for a better life. But can't we also expect from the same new Americans that they come here with the desire to be a part of the nation, to adapt to American culture, values, and way of life even when it doesn't benefit themselves, that they also respect and fight for the ideals this nation was founded on? One thing I didn't talk so much about was the drug cartel issue. But in a way, it was like a silent companion. No one talked about it, yet you could feel its presence. No doubt we must address the problems with drug trafficking, violence, and illegal immigration. But it is how we do so that marks our character and integrity as Americans. In history, there are so many scary instances of what happens when you divide people. Take, for example, the Berlin Wall. Is there another solution? I hope there is, because building the wall says more about us than the people who try to climb it. As I said in the beginning, when I don't know something, I go and find out. I hope that this film will inspire you to do the same. There's so much to learn from those who come to this nation hoping for a better life. After all, when it comes down to reality, what are we if not a nation of immigrants?
To me, it's like my friends in the military told me, there has to be something that to you means America. And I had a friend from New York, and to him, America was, the first thing he saw was the Statue of Liberty. And to me, was seeing the Rio Grande River and the bridge. That's my Statue of Liberty.
If I had to define the Rio Grande, or how we call it in Matamoros, Rio Bravo, I would say that I would define it as union. It's something that unifies, yet it's supposed to divide.
The Rio Grande, or Rio Bravo, is a blending of two cultures. Friends, family, we're all one big family down here, and the rest of the country doesn't have anything like we have here. You have to come down here to realize it and become a part of this culture. It's unique anywhere in the world.
To me, the Rio Grande stands for family. Most of us all grew up in the lower valley, and it's just united. We are all united. So it's just family and friends. Can't have any better than that.
In my life, the border, the wall, the Rio Grande, for me, it means separation, because growing up and what I'm seeing now that I'm more politically conscious, I guess, is that they want to have separation between the US and Mexico. So it's sad for me for that. I feel separation.
I think it is just a line. It's always been a fluid line, and not just because of the water, it's because of the people and the animals that go on either side of that line to have their home.
So I grew up, on a little ranch about 4 miles from the river. The river for us was where historically our family would go down to get water. That's where we would water our livestock. It's our only source of drinking water to this day. And so, agua es vida. Water is life.